Welcome to the Efficient Spend podcast, where we help marketers turn media spend into revenue. My guest today
Great to be
is
here.
Sean Hurley. Sean, thanks for being here.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. We've been working together for it's going to be a year coming up shortly,
Yep.
but I would love if you could kind of just introduce yourself to the audience and from the context of your experience with optimizing marketing spend.
Sure. Yeah, I'll try to keep it quick. I've been in the marketing growth space for the past 16 years, heavily focused on D2C, B2C brands, really focused on tech. I would say my sweet spot is anywhere from Series A to Series B, where we're really trying to figure out what is our channel mix? Can we be profitable? Is any of this predictable? What does our data look like? And during my career, I've worked for, I would say, close to 15 different scale ups, driving close to $500 million in revenue, but really with a focus on what's predictable, what's profitable, and how do we really level up data literacy, not only in the growth team, but across the entire company. And we'll dive probably more into that today. And then more recently, a couple of years ago, I decided to leave my daytime role and launch my own consulting business. And so the goal there is just really, how do I offer fractional support to teams that need the support, when you need it, how you need it, and be more behind the scenes. And so I launched a company called Pathright. And so with that, I am working with the teams. I'm in the weeds. We're solving growth problems. I'm helping people achieve their career goals. And that's my sweet spot. Like, how do I work and help more people and focus on really interesting growth problems? And that's how you and I met.
Yeah, it is, and one of the things that you've really empowered me to do a little bit more is to optimize towards revenue and optimize towards impact. And if you look at your LinkedIn profile, really focused on revenue. The idea that I have with efficient spend is this growth loop of turning media spend into revenue that then gets reinvested into media spend. And that's how you scale and that's how you create compounding returns.
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask you, why revenue? Why revenue as a North Star? It's probably an obvious question. And I feel
Mm-hmm.
like maybe folks don't think about it as much, but how do you kind of think about, optimizing teams towards impact, and why is revenue that kind of North Star that you focus a lot on?
Yeah, I think there's like a couple of things. I think for, what do people understand? Most people will understand revenue. If they see revenue growth, they'll understand that. And I think that's an easier way to communicate, where I focus, the impact I've had. But if you dig deeper into my experience, my entire focus is, how do I create a diversified channel mix? Revenue growth is great. And most companies need to focus still on revenue growth. But at the same time, an equal focus needs to be put towards, how do we reduce CAC? How do we continue to scale our current efforts with the same budget, with less budget? How do we know if, when we're scaling, we're not going to see incremental costs, which often happen? Like, if I'm spending $1 million today on Facebook, and the head of growth comes to me and says, Sean, go spend another $1 million, and expects CAC to stay the same, well, that's just not possible, right? We know platforms like variably cost channels like Facebook, paid search, the pricing is like this constantly. It's constantly moving up and down every second with every ad. Which is important as part of a channel mix, because there's not many other channels outside of like out of home and television that are going to drive top of funnel awareness. But for me, the focus is really, how do I create a marketing channel mix where no one channel owns more than 30% of your revenue? And the reason why I do this is because it creates more defensibility, number one, so that if one channel decides to bomb, like let's look at like when they did the iOS update.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, all these companies that were relying on Facebook to drive 90% of their revenue tanked, and they had no easy solution to move that revenue to another channel. For companies that have built a diverse channel mix, it only really impacted 20, 30% of their revenue. And by that time, they were able to move the rest of that gap over to their other channels in the mix. And so the reason why I focus on that is I want to see a combination of a couple of things. I want to see, how do we introduce non-paid channels like SEO, CRM, organic influencers, content? How do we bring in fixed cost channels like referral programs that have a viral coefficient to them? How do we focus on affiliates and partnerships? and then variably cost channels, because between all three of those, we can actually reduce CAC significantly. And in some cases, I've come into companies full-time or fractional, and we'll see like a 70% CAC reduction simply by diversifying our revenue mix within our channels. And that's like, people are like, well, why don't we want to continue to push on Facebook if we're seeing the growth from it? It's like, you're seeing revenue growth, you're seeing top line growth, but you're not actually seeing CAC reduction. If you can continue to drive Facebook and hold your costs at the same time, bring in more scale with non-paid and fixed costs, your overall CAC is going to come down. It allows you to play a little bit more with your variably cost channels. And so, revenue is the North Star because companies need to grow regardless, even if it's slow. But at the same time, you need to be finding ways to reduce your CAC. Like nobody wants to buy a stock at a public company that's it's just burning cash. And no one is going to give somebody a next round of funding if what they're doing has no sustainability to it. They're not going to just pay for that money to come into the company and go out towards Facebook and Google search. And so for me, my entire focus in my career is, how do I help companies diversify their channel mix? I think the input to that is data literacy. Most teams don't truly understand the P&L of the business. They don't understand, if I do this thing, here's my input, what is the output? And we'll dive into it deeper, but in my point of view, every single person in the company owns growth. It is not just a marketing ownership, product, customer service, operations, finance. Every single person has an ability to impact growth, but not even just top line growth, but how do we make it more efficient?
For sure. Yeah. And I think it's been kind of a mindset shift for me over the past couple of years. Understanding, playing the game within Facebook and knowing, okay, here's the campaign strategy, here's the budget management, the creative changes that we need to make. How do we optimize this spend within this very specific channel? And that also hits a level of diminishing returns too. There's only and it's probably a large audience, but there is a diminishing returns in a given channel. And there's a diminishing returns within paid as well. It's kind of funny. This podcast is about efficient spend from the context of a paid media budget. But one of the first things you look at is, how do you optimize these non-paid channels to reduce CAC?
Yes.
I also, a lot of the folks that I follow on LinkedIn that run these paid media agencies are so focused on the hacks to optimize that Facebook spend. I wonder, when you do advising and you bring on a client, and maybe they ask you, what should we be doing with our paid? What are the type of what are the sound bites, or what's the data that you're trying to glean from them to understand, are you not investing in SEO enough? Are you not investing in organic enough? Are you not investing in influencers enough? Is that like that first line of questions that you go into when you're kind of evaluating a new client that you're working with?
I mean, it really depends on the client, but I would say, let's say 80% of the people I work with are spending a lot of money on paid channels, and let's just say Facebook, for example. I think that the secondary questions are, how do we diversify your channel mix? The first question I ask is, what percentage of your spend is profitable? At a very simple question. So if I spend $1 on Facebook, what am I getting back, if anything? And based on their ability to answer that question or not, I have a good sense of where I'm at. From a data literacy, from an efficiency standpoint of that channel, I've come into companies where they are, quote unquote, the best at Facebook performance. And I'll ask them a question, what percentage of your spend is profitable? And they can't answer that question. And so my second line of question is, okay, so say we broke it down into 3 different categories. Over the past, let's say 60 days, what percentage of your spend did you acquire customers at or below your CPA or your CAC target? So how many customers did you acquire that are profitable? So if we say $100 is your CPA, how many customers did you acquire for $100 or less as a percentage of your spend over 60 days? The next one is, what percent of your spend did you acquire customers at 100 or higher, which is your incremental cost to acquire a customer. You've set up, you want to spend 100, How many did you get at 101, 200, 500, 1,000? The third category is what percentage of your spend did you spend and have no conversions? The unfortunate part, and most of the time, is that percentage is often way too big. It should be about 10 to 15% because you're going to launch campaigns, they're going to fail. Ones are going to work and then stop working. But your ability to turn those off quickly is really where you're going to find more profitable spend. And what I'm trying to really isolate is in the first category, in terms of how much you have in your profitable spend, if you're acquiring customers at $40 like all day, why would you not spend more on those campaigns to max out that opportunity between $40 and 100? Because all of the conversions that exist within that period of time and within that space is profitable. On the secondary category, which is your incremental spend, I'm going to say, why are you spending money when it's already above the average cost to acquire a customer? Like this fallacy that somehow that ad that is now costing you $400 is going to come down under $100 in the next few days is unrealistic, and statistically it becomes impossible. Every dollar you spend above your average becomes harder to actually make it more profitable. And so so what percentage of your spend is profitable is the first question. Next is break down your spend so I understand how much of it's profitable, how much of it's incremental, and how much of it was just a total waste. And as much as I want to believe that the bigger the budgets are, the more efficient the spend is, it's often the other way around.
Right.
People that are spending like 20K a month on Facebook, they're watching every single dollar. They're ruthless with their spend. When it gets bigger and bigger, if you don't have other channels to take the pressure off of the growth targets for the marketing team, Facebook is pushed to its limits. Like it really is. And I think that's where you start to see companies move away from understanding profitable spend, and they're just giving you blended CAC. What's your average cost to acquire a customer on Facebook? Oh, well, it's $105. And the way my brain works is, okay, well, the average is 105. So how many are you converting up at like 300 or 400, and how many are down at like $10, $15? And so before I even get into another channel mix, I want to stop essentially like the wasted spend, which is often, hey, we've been spending $1 million a month on Facebook, 300,000 of it, it's going into this bucket of not acquiring any customers. Let's use that more effectively. And I'm helping them basically reinvest in their channel. Like, how do you create your own budget? You do that by delivering more profitable growth. And that profitable growth, if your arrangement with the company is, hey, if you're acquiring customers at $50 on average, take that additional 50 that we were giving you for your CAC, reinvest those dollars back into your budget. And that's how you create that profitable channel. After that, I start getting into, okay, we're going to take our Facebook CAC from $100 down to 50, but our total CAC across the company is still high because our other paid channels are not as efficient. So we're going to start figuring out, when do we introduce SEO? It's going to take 6 to 12 months to ramp up. And over time, as that's ramping up, we can be reducing some of our paid efforts that are not efficient. And so it's really like depends on how they answer. I know there's a long-winded way of answering the question, but it's not really as simple as, hey, go add more channels. It's, what is the current state of your spend?
Sure. Yeah. And a simple question like, what percentage of your spend is profitable? Because of privacy, challenges in measurement, complexity, I don't know what that number is, but what percentage of people can answer that question right off the bat?
Usually 10%, 10 to 20%. And it's because, like, even if you were to say, you know what, we don't know unique numbers, we don't know unique conversion numbers. Okay, well, then let's just be super simple and say, how many customers did you acquire yesterday and what was your average cost? How many customers did you acquire the next day? What was your average cost? And so you're getting a sense of, like, you're still able to see, okay, well, we know CAC on Tuesdays is 40% higher than CAC on Fridays. Well, okay, let's spend more money on Fridays. Let's reduce our money on the days that's not as effective. And so, I think the attribution often becomes an escape opportunity or an excuse. And I think there are always ways to, when you're digging into data, to find the answers you need. It won't be perfect. And I think that's okay. I don't think that there's anybody in a space that has this nailed down to like an absolute science and perfection.
Mm-hmm.
But even if we say we're converting customers on average for this amount, I would start cutting all my ads that are now being spent above a certain percentage of that average cost. So if it's $100 is our average and there's a campaign that's at 150, often your incremental cost to acquire a customer is inflated because people let those campaigns stay on for too long. Like people aren't cutting their losses fast enough. And you and I talk about this a lot, right? It's scale your wins faster, cut your losses faster. And I think that kind of methodology is not applied often because of the pressures that are on the channel and the team. The team is like, well, it's at $180, but our other channels are driving them at $400. Let's just go with 180. And when you get into that mentality of like, well, this is better than the other thing, it just kind of starts to balloon from there. And you realize that you're wasting a lot of money. Like in most cases, I would assume that businesses now, given the current state of economy, would actually rather you not spend the money than just trying to do it because it's cheaper than the other option available to you.
Well, I think there's a couple of challenges there. One is at scale, generally the size of your team does not expand at the velocity at which you scale into new channels.
No.
And so you have a smaller team managing more channels, more campaigns, more complexity. Mm-hmm. That's where really good systems, processes, and tools like potentially hyperscale, right, yes, could come into play to allow you to automate some of that decision making. The other aspect of that is that you do need to wait a certain time period to get learnings on what type of campaign. And there's this sweet spot of we need enough to get what we consider to be stat sig.
Yes.
But we also need to be able to cut that once we figure out this is garbage. We need to get it out.
Exactly.
So
yeah, and you see it, right? Like you see ads get better over time, but you also see them get worse. And I think it's like, to your point, having a clear understanding of at what point do you ramp and what point do you stop is honestly the simple framework that's just not really applied to it in a lot of cases. And the reason why I focus so much on channel diversity is if, say, we are getting SEO or referral, say referrals viral coefficient, or more simply put, the percentage of people to successfully refer a friend was at 0.2 or 0.3, which is 20 or 30% of all your revenue at a fixed cost of, say, $25. It gives you a bit more affordability to really figure out when to scale and when to stop on your variably cost channels. The problem is that these channels are often where all of your money is being spent. The pressure and the focus in the entire company is on the people running those channels, and you're set up for failure. And so, like, I'm not only trying to think, how do I make the marketing team and the company more efficient, but like, holy shit, how do you take the pressure off those teams? Because it's almost unbearable in some cases. I come in and I'm like, people feel deflated. They're like, there's no way for us to win. So we either miss the target and the company misses the entire target because the reliance on growth from that Facebook channel, for example, is so much that if they cut their losses too soon and they lose those conversions, even if they were incremental cost, they still lose. Like there's in a lot of cases, there's no winning. And to your point, like for hyperscale, the entire framework of the company that Evelyn and I are building, my co-founder, is that scale faster, cut faster, but also having nuances of understanding your average as it relates to maybe your CPA goal, still basing yourself on the average because it helps mitigate this concern of attribution, right? Like even if your Facebook numbers don't match what you're seeing internally within your dashboards, if you're improving Facebook on the platform, directionally, it's going to be better for the business, right? I've never seen a case where, we see on the Facebook platform, we've reduced costs by 50%, where you're not seeing a reduction of cost in some amount within your internal numbers, right? So you're mitigating that attribution concern. I think that my hope with it is if I can take away the when do we start, when do we stop, when do we scale of ads, when do we refresh our creative, and I can free up a Facebook performance person's time by like 30 or 40%, it gives them time to like think more about strategy. It gives them more time to focus on creative, which is going to be the biggest difference in terms of performance, is your ability to come out with good creative. Since all those targeting options changed, like the problem is you're in there tweaking so much in the weeds that you have no time to really step out and think about the creative. Well, the creative is actually going to drive the best CAC, the best performance, the best growth. And so I'm trying to not only like help focus on driving incremental improvements, reducing CAC, but also seeing your ROI go up, but also free up that human's time to focus on the thing that's going to drive the best performance. Like there's a loop there that we're trying to fix where the team isn't set up for failure, because I see it all the time. And it's just, there's just so much pressure on this team and there's so much pressure on the company to scale. But if you don't have the time to launch a new channel, focus on the things that are going to drive the channel, how do you win?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I posted about this a couple of months ago. Um, I'd rather spend $100,000, 80K on paid and 20K on ads versus like 95K on paid, 5K on
Yes.
ads. Uh,
Yes.
Ad development as a percentage of your spend, that is a lever, especially with more and more
Yes.
automation, where campaign managers are creating campaigns where the audience is basically automated bidding is automated. Most of it is in creative and creative
Mm-hmm.
management and
Yeah.
knowing when to pause and when to scale. I want to go in a different direction though. We talked a lot
Sure.
about CAC, channel diversification. What about LTV, right? Like, I
Mm-hmm.
don't think we talk about it as much. And
No.
I've been thinking about this a little bit recently, which is to say that from a paid marketer's perspective, a lot of the work that we do is to acquire these customers. Um, and depending on the industry, it's a little bit different, but I don't think as much about how do you deploy paid to improve LTV. Maybe that's the wrong question, but um, for maybe those in the audience that are managing a paid marketing budget, what would your recommendations be to start to think about how do you look at this LTV number and improve it?
Yeah, it's kind of a loaded question because that's probably why you're asking. Because LTV is going to be dependent on the stage of the company. And so in a lot of cases at startups, it's like, well, we need to see a 6-to-1 ratio CAC to LTV. We need to see a 3-to-1, a 12-to-1 in some cases I've been at. And we need to see it over a certain period of time. And so I think it depends on the stage of the company. I would say that if you're like, you've been around for a few years, you've got customers and cohorts that have stayed around, you have a pretty good sense of what like even your first 12 months of LTV is going to be. I think the thing to dig deeper into is, was there a campaign? Was there a cohort? Was there a point in time that through your paid efforts drove a higher LTV? Like, was that cohort more valuable for some reason? And so you can get into a situation where we can say, okay, because Facebook, for example, drives really low quality customers, we're actually going to reduce that channel's CAC because the LTV on it is lower. What I think often happens is we have these, again, with these massive numbers of like, you have one CAC and you have one LTV. I don't think that's real. I think what's
Right.
real is there's actually probably a CAC and an LTV based on their demo, their persona, their likelihood to stay, their likelihood to refer a customer. Like, for example, at one of the other companies we worked at called Open Care, we were seeing that like if someone came in on Facebook, they were 3 times more likely to refer a friend. Well, that means that somebody coming in through Facebook is actually worth a lot more to me than somebody that was coming in through another channel that does no referrals. And so I had to start thinking about our Facebook efforts as a relationship to how do I actually drive more referrals. So if Facebook, let's say, had a ROAS of 1, it was break even on its own. But if I started to include the impact it has on referral, that ROAS goes from 1 to like 3. And
Right.
so, for us, it was, understanding channel correlation also has an impact on LTV, because you start to see, are they actually influencing other channels' growth because the users coming from here are better quality, they're talking more socially, they're posting on their organic social on their own platforms. And so I think what happens is like teams need to push harder on what is the actual quality of the people coming from your channel, and how do you either fight for, a bit more room on CAC, because you could say like, our max is $100, but we think if we add an additional $10, the unlock of customers coming from 100 to 110 are valuable. Like we think that like by changing that, we like their LTV is so much stronger than other channels that we're actually hindering growth because we're setting a cap at 100 across all of our channels. And so I think that's where LTV comes into play. Like another example is a company I worked for in New York. We had this SaaS product and we offered it to three different personas. We had pro photographers, businesses, and personal. And then we had monthly plans and annual plans. When I started, we had one CAC goal based on the LTV, and it was all blended.
Yeah.
By the time I left, we had a CAC goal by persona, by monthly or annual, and by channel. And with that, we were able to really understand and drive our costs lower, but also focus on those high value customers. Because what we were doing is we were actually underspending on businesses. We were saying, oh, we're only willing to, we're, again, $100. We're only willing to spend $100 to acquire a business.
Sure.
But what we realized was when we started looking at the LTV, they were like 4 times more valuable than the personal, where we were spending the same amount of money to acquire personal that we were for business. And so once we understood those dynamics of like a business user's LTV was significantly higher, we're willing to spend a bit more on the CAC side because we can drive growth and it's actually more profitable. And so I think my overarching thought as a marketer or growth person, whatever you want to call me, is you need to dig deeper. Like growth comes from granularity. It does not come from blended numbers and one KPI. And so, at the start of the conversation, you said, why revenue? It's like, well, everyone understands revenue. But in order to really talk about revenue that matters, it's profitable revenue. And that's going to come from granularity. You need to dive deep. Like the more you move away from blended numbers, the more opportunity you're going to see. And it's painful at the start. It's painful because you're like, shit, we've wasted a lot of money. Like I've been at companies where I've come in and 10% of their spend is profitable, and they've burned through $14 million of their seed round on unprofitable spend. And then they're like, well, what do? We only have a few million left of runway. How do we solve this? And it's like, okay, well, you have an email list of 100,000. We can that are not active. We can figure out how to activate them. We can see who's in your current base that could do a referral. How do we offer incentives? How do you do a discount so that the discount on one of your channels improves the conversion rate so much that it also reduces CAC, even though you've added an incentive? And so I think that granularity, data literacy are probably the biggest unlocks. But if you can really dive deeper into what is the value that each customer is bringing by channel, by segment, by whatever you want to, however you want to slice it up, there's more opportunity for growth.
Yeah. That's a great answer. And then it kind of inspires me too. And I think about from even a more granular paid perspective, how channel correlation, different channels impact the performance in other channels. As an example, investing more in upper funnel awareness-based campaigns will generally improve performance. And it makes sense, right? When you think about audiences, you want to create intent. And there's a certain portion of your audience that is going to be ready to purchase this product. And you can really go get those in the door with very direct response type of marketing. But you use upper funnel and brand as a lever to build that intent to bring them down. Yeah. And you see that, you can see that improvement. I know we have about 10 minutes left. I want to get into rapid fire, but before I do that, something I completely nerd out on is lifestyle design. So I'm sure maybe a lot of people listening read the 4-Hour Work Week, right? And in our careers, a lot of us are working remotely now. We have a lot more flexibility in the ability to manage our work week the way that we want. We can now work out in the middle of the day. We don't have to go to an office for a lot of folks. I wonder if there's any kind of tips or tricks or recommendations that you have for how do you think about kind of like planning your week out? What are some frameworks that could be helpful for folks in that regard? Specifically, I guess, around optimizing towards impact. I'm starting to think about that more, right? But I think a lot about this idea of inputs and outputs, right? Efficient spend, the logo is turning media spend into revenue, the input going into the output. If the output is kind of like input, the output is impact, the input is our time and what we're doing with it. So
Yes.
how do you kind of think about that?
Sure. Let me ask you a question. What
Yeah.
percentage of your week is spent on impactful things where you can draw a very clear line of the hour you spent on something and the impact it's going to have on the business?
I would say 30%, a third, 33%. Yeah.
That's most people, right? Like I think the 80-20 rule applies. And it's something that like I fall into all the time. I'll be like, well, I'm so busy. I'm doing all these things. And then I hit pause and I ask myself, how much of this is actually having an impact on what I'm trying to accomplish? And most of the time it's 20%. And the like, sorry, 80% of what I'm working on drives 20% of the impact, and then vice versa. And I do this exercise all the time with my teams at scale. It's let's write down everything you're working on right now, and let's see how quickly we can tie a correlation between the function you're doing and the impact we're trying to drive. And really quickly, it's like you could have 10x more impact and work half the time if you wanted to, because you're working on a lot of things that are keeping you busy but not really having the impact you want. And so when it comes to like lifestyle design, for me example, like when I was a full-time executive at a startup, I was working 70 to 100 hours a week. I was burning out constantly. And when I took a quick step back and I said, well, what am I spending my time on? It was all these things that we tell ourselves that are important that I thought that I had to do. And then I decided to quit my job and be a consultant where all I do is spend time in working sessions, one-on-ones, looking at data, giving feedback. And I'm able to do that with 4 different companies all within the same week. And I don't take meetings on Fridays. Mondays are a slower day. I do a lot of my meetings between Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and the impact has been greater. And so for me, it's like, I do this every single week. I look at my calendar and I say, is the thing that I have in my calendar going to drive the impact I want? If not, it doesn't need to happen. And I think the more ruthless you can get with that, the better. But I think it's important for managers and leaders to do that with their teams. The hard part is I, as the employee, think I'm doing something for Paul, my manager, that he wants me to do. And then when I ask Paul, Paul's going to say, well, why are you working on that? That's not important to me at all. But often the miscommunication creates these crazy workloads where people think they need to continue doing something or start doing something that's actually not that helpful. And so I think it's like you can do it on your own. Just ask yourself, like, where can I draw the lines easily? And then an assessment with your manager, or if you're the leader, do it with your staff. Like people spend way too much time on things that are not that important, myself included.
Right. Yeah, and I feel like part of that is work, the meetings that you're in, recurring meetings, things like that. But part of it is it's funny, but like from an ROI perspective, exercise, meditation,
Yes.
healthy eating, good sleep, like those levers are super important as well to prevent burnout.
I have never been more healthy and consistent from an energy standpoint than I have
That's
been since
awesome.
I started my fractional business. So like Fridays, I was very specific in that I don't work, I don't do calls, and I ride my bike. Like I Fridays are literally for the thing that helps me from an active meditation. I do some mindful meditation, but I find for me the best way to clear my brain or to declutter is to be on my bike, to be running, to go to the gym, getting more sleep. And so once you start cutting out all these hours that are spent on ineffective things, you actually create more balance without actually trying to create more balance.
Right.
People are like, well, I want to start finishing work at 4 o'clock. It's like, you could finish at 2 o'clock probably and have just as much impact as if you were to work to 6 o'clock. And so for me now, I sleep better. I have more time for my friends and family. I'm exercising more, and I have not been burnt out in 2 years. Where before I was in a cycle of every 6 months I was burning out, and I had no life. I wasn't available to my friends and family. I felt like I was just kind of like on this hamster wheel, and you never feel better. You just never feel better, and you're always not giving somebody something that they need. You're always under delivering. You're always missing deadlines. There was like no way to win until I got a lot more ruthless with my time. A simple exercise. I said, what am I good at and what am I not good at? I wrote down everything I'm doing and I put a check or an X next to what I was good at and what I wasn't. Everything that I wasn't good at or didn't want to spend my time on, I stopped doing. And that list of like what I'm good at was very small. but has the highest impact. And again, it comes down to that 80-20. And I think if people optimize for what are they really good at, what gives them energy, it's typically going to be the things that give them the most impact in their life and in their career, whether it's at work or fitness or health or spending time with family. Um, you have to be way more intentional. It is not going to happen. Your employer is not going to do it for you. Your manager is not going to do it for you. Your partner is not going to do it for you. If you don't take control of your life, you're going to continue to be on that hamster wheel and you're never going to be happy.
I love that about your personal brand as well. You balance this idea of self-care and living a good life with wanting to win and setting goals and hitting them and
Yeah.
accomplishing them. So cool. Couple rapid fire questions. One thing I'm really curious about is there a current topic that you're really diving into right now in terms of like noteworthy trends, things that are happening in the industry? Is there anything that you're like reading about, geeking out about, really excited about?
Yeah, it's not really even related to marketing. It's more related to leadership, but it's emotional safety. I think that like a lot of constraints that come from employees being effective, having open lines of communication comes from emotional safety. And so I'm reading and I'm asking a lot of questions about this topic because I think if we can create more safe environments for employees to try, fail, learn, the growth potential, not only for their career path, but for the company as an end result becomes pretty significant. So emotional safety and workplace safety is really important to me.
Uh, I can say personally also the difference in my motivation, my ability to work hard and care about things when I feel emotionally safe.
Yes.
So there's a business impact. The podcast is called Efficient Spend Podcast.
Yes.
Last two questions. What is the most efficient money that you've spent on marketing, and what's the most inefficient money you've spent on marketing?
Most efficient was hiring a CRM person to build out a referral program. I think like we went from zero impact from referral to a K factor of 0.4, which is 40% of our revenue. And it was fixed cost and it happened really quick. And it was a self-sustaining, in some cases, growth loop. That was one of the most efficient. The most inefficient, TV, like a TV test.
Okay.
I think that I should have done more calls with people that I've already spent the money. Like the thing that we don't do enough of as a profession in marketing is we're all spending like hundreds of millions of dollars at different brands, and we're not sharing those ideas.
Yeah.
Hence, me launching the Slack community, Predictable Scale, was for us to just share where we're losing. And I would say what my first TV campaign felt like a complete flop. Like we spent a couple $100,000. We saw only noise, no signal. Since then, have run TV successfully because I talked to more people. I focused on the creative. I understood how to do a proper lift analysis, and so there's a whole host of other very inefficient activities, but the learnings are often pretty significant.
Sure. Cool. Awesome, Sean. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.